Okay, so I'm gonna do an update on the last video that I had for the sled. This is a 2013 XF 1100 turbo. It's got about 2,300 miles on it, not really that much at all. And on my last video, I'll put a link down below. But I tore into the chain case, fixed the reverse actuator, and that actually fixed my reverse for a while, and it started acting up again. So I decided to do the 2015 and update for it, which gives you a jack shaft, the new jack shaft, which looks like this. This is clutch side, secondary, chain case side. And what this does is it allows you to do away with a few of the problems. It's a tougher metal. It's got a more rigid design as far as the splines. And when I get in there, I'll show you exactly what I'm trying to do. Okay, so got all the hood plastic off, side panels, top panels, seat. Took off the back cover also. My next step is going to try to be, obviously, to get the resonator out of the way, aka the muffler. And then I'm going to try to somehow get into the chain case without having to change the engine oil right away, because I don't want to do that just yet. But this is my current process, in case you've ever wondered what one looks like without the hood plastic on. Okay, so I got the resonator out. I wanted to point something out that I see a lot of people struggling with or asking questions about on forums, and it's this spring right here that's actually behind the resonator or the muffler. It's clipped right there. What I do is I take a piece of copper and I feed it underneath the spring on the opposite side of where it holds. There it goes. On the opposite side of the muffler. So it would look like this. I feed it behind here, and I simply just use a pair of pliers, and I start twisting it until I can slide it off. Now to reinstall it, which is even more difficult, what I end up doing is I do the same thing. I'll leave this piece of wire here, and then I'll pull it up with a pair of pliers to clip it back on the muffler. And when I'm done, I'll just cut the copper wire with some snips down here, and then I'll just pull the remaining pieces out. It's the easiest way I've found to do it. So one of the things that you'll want to definitely make sure you do here is, before you release this chain case, which is these bolts right here on the back side, don't undo these, because then you'll have to get a sealant specifically from Arctic Cat that seals the oil chamber again. So you do not want to touch these. Take your hose off here, and make sure when you take your reverse actuator out that this thing is turned all the way counterclockwise, and then pull it out. That's your cog that moves your reverse actuator inside of here on top of your spline. That's actually my problem. See, I can't even turn this by hand because it's binding up on the bad spline rails, or whatever you want to call them. Spline teeth, spliney splines, who knows. But anyhow, so what you want to do is you want to go around and loosen these up. And then once you get to the bottom ones, you want to have your drain pan in place, because your fluid's going to start coming out of this hole right here. Wait for the chain case to drain, and then you can start to pull this monstrosity out of the way. Okay, so I ended up having to take the chain case and oil reservoir off, which are over there. This is what the inside of the chain case looks like, and I was able to free up the gear. And it was for some reason really stuck against the actual engaging gear for drive, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If I rotate this gear just a little bit, See, if I tilt this gear when it slides, it feels like it's catching on the actual spline itself. And it is worn a little bit. It doesn't look like much. It doesn't even really feel like much. But you can see it just a tiny bit on the splines themselves. And there's actually like little shards of metal in the splines. I don't know if you can see that or not. But so this is where we're at so far. We're gonna undo the tension on the chain, take it all the way off, and we're gonna go ahead and pull these out, clean them off real good, take off the secondary clutch, and then we'll try to get this jack shaft out of there. So also, while I'm in here, this is something I wanted to point out. There's actually like little pads in here that I've heard need to be replaced every so often. Mine don't look bad, and that's definitely not my issue, but they seem to get hung up, I guess. It's this little copper looking thing right here. I hope you can see it. Quick update, I went ahead and pulled off the reverse gear. Something is not really binding on the shaft itself. I really couldn't tell you exactly what's going on here. But the splines seem fine, honestly. But something is catching them on the way away from the actual drive gear. So, anyhow, got the reverse top and lower reverse gear off. Now, when you take the lower reverse gear off, you see these little rubber black things. You got to be careful with those. You don't want to pull that off of there and get it mixed up on where it needs to go. There's also a circlip down here. It's a linear circlip. You can see the actual gap for it. You got to take that off. Looks like that. Use just simple snap ring pliers. I got the ones that have the straight edge, that have the removable pieces, and I found ones that fit pretty well in there. And that's where I'm at so far. Okay, now that I got the chain case pretty much all the way empty. What's up, man? Got Nick coming in to help now.
What's up?
I'm gonna go ahead and leave the chain tensioner on, and I've got my two forks. I'm just gonna leave those for right now. And there's a tab right here. I don't know if you can see it or not. It's actually bent down on the retaining lug right there. You're gonna have to bend that up with a flathead screwdriver. And then on the other side, went ahead and took the secondary clutch off. It's a little dirty, needs to be cleaned up, but it doesn't really matter since I'm replacing the jack shaft anyhow. Okay, so I got the jack shaft out, clutch side bearing. So I have a tip for advice. Make sure when you hit this, you actually hit this with something else to contact the shaft, and not you'll blunt the end and have a hell of a time getting it out like I did. I ended up having to grind it down, and now I'm going to have to spray out the chain case really good. It also helps to have a really big friend to pull on your shaft for you.
Yeah.
Alright, now we got to get the other shaft bearing out, which is chain case side. What I did was, to make it real easy, is I left this retaining nut on the actual threads here. And I used a bearing tool that looks like this right here. This is part number, I don't know. It's an OTC 30767 2x2. Made in the USA, globally sourced. But this looks exactly like the OSP bearing installer, and it was free for me. So you might check into getting one of these. These might be actually cheaper than the OSP bearing installer. Alright, let me do an update here. So I got the driven shaft in, got the clips on, and the retaining ring. One of the things that I had trouble with, me and my friend had trouble when we went to slide this side of the driven shaft in. It actually started to push the bearing back out a little bit, even though I had let it cool for a good 20 to 30 minutes. And also, I should probably note that on this diagram that you can print off, this pretty much shows you the order that everything is supposed to go on. Now, I was freaking out there for a minute thinking that I didn't have some of the pieces that I needed, but then I realized that this diagram is probably for the original shaft, which required a retaining ring, and then it also required a shim, I'm pretty sure. So, long story short, be mindful of that you're probably not missing pieces. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and I'm going to start putting back the chain case and clean everything up. Put back my secondary. I might call it a night. Something I found that was helpful was, since I pressed this side in first, obviously, the shaft wasn't there, I found to make sure that it was seated all the way, I put this through the bearing hole after I drove it in with the bearing driver that I showed you, and I pounded it, and it actually seated it all the way in perfectly. So you can use your old drive shaft to knock the bearing out on chain case side and to put the bearing back in on chain case side. So okay, so I forgot to mention, just to make sure you guys know this, there's actually a circlip that needs to go inside of your bearing on this side, which looks like this. This is the old one that came out of the secondary clutch side. You want to put the accordion clip, is what I call it, or snake clip, whatever, back inside of your bearing before you start mounting your gears, or you could have a real problem down the road. You also need to do it on the opposite side as well. Okay, so when you put your top drive gear on, you want to make sure that you have a synthetic gear lube or some kind of assembly grease, and be generous with it. Don't worry about it. It will it'll wash away with the chain case oil circulating anyhow, but you want to make sure this is oiled really well. Alright, I got everything back together as far as the chain case goes. Ready to put the cover back on. Went ahead and put my new circlip down here, which is a lot nicer than the linear clips. One of the only things I'm concerned about is my chain might be too loose, because if I swing the chain tensioner all the way back like this and then put tension on it, it doesn't grab it until further down here, and it says to start it out on 2.5. I don't know, it just seems a little looser than I would have liked it to be. This is probably the normal ride. I could have probably replaced it. I should have, but it'll be good for now. I checked the boss back here, and it's not riding on it and hasn't been hitting it, so we should be good. Make sure I clean my magnets, top and bottom. Replace the new high heat gear riders for the reverse gear. And what do you know, it slides a lot easier. Sweet. Hopefully it'll go backwards. Okay, so I got the chain case, oil lines all back on. Cleaned up the bay a little bit. And now I'm about to install the shift actuator extension update. And I'll show you what that looks like before I mount the actual actuator. This goes in here, by the way. And it looks like this. Basically a locking block that doesn't allow your actuator motor to go backwards or forwards any more than it needs to, which saves the motor and also keeps the gear positioning correct. Okay, so that's what it'll look like when it's finally installed, and it says right here that you want to rotate it clockwise 20 degrees to kind of put the bottom of the notch against the top of the resting place of the notch, like so. So when you put the actuator in, because you got to lock it in the way it locks in, when you spin the actuator backwards, it'll actually lock it and make sure that it's locked into forward gear. I think that's how it's supposed to work. Then you install the 3 screws, put number 243 blue Loctite on them, and don't forget that there is this tab right here that holds this wire. Okay, so there's the actuator in place. Everything's all back together. Checked everything, oil hoses. Went ahead and placed the oil drain pan O-ring on this. Went ahead and took my oil filter out. Okay, so now this is something that'll help everybody out there. This oil filter right here is a real bear to get to. It's a real pain, trust me. It hurts, looks like that. But it makes it a little bit easier if you take off this plate right here, because all the oil that comes out of it will come, most of it will drain out here. Also, remember to replace your crush washer and drain the oil out of the engine. I already did that. I'm going to leave that open so when I refill it, I can make sure that it's not leaking. But anyhow, what else? I think that's it right now. I'm going to go ahead and fill the engine up with oil. One of the biggest things, though, that I've heard people mess up on, I was just actually in the shop today, and a guy had destroyed this exact same motor because he didn't bleed the oil screw. I don't know if you can even see that. It's kind of hard to see even for me. It's a little tiny oil screw that just trust me, you have to refer to your owner's manual, but it's down there. It's a Phillips head screw. Don't try to use a Phillips head screwdriver though. I'm pretty sure it's an 8mm. And you crack it open, count to 5, let the air out of it. You won't probably hear anything, you probably won't see anything, you'll probably think this is pointless, but trust me, what it does is it fills up that cavity with oil again. And if you don't do that, you'll wind up just like the guy that I saw have his motor destroyed prematurely. So I can't show you it because it's down here and it's really hard to see, but you get the point. Just look for it, make sure you do it. Okay, so I got the muffler back in, O2 sensors hooked up, routed. I went around and made sure everything was tight again. Like I said, to get this spring on down here, the best way to do it is to tie like a piece of copper wire and get a pair of vice grips or something underneath of it, pull it up on there, and then cut the wire with some wire snip. I went ahead and replaced the shim on the driven shaft clutch side, 60,000 shim. That's what it was before, but the other original was a little bit worn down. Check my snap ring, accordion ring, whatever you want to call it again. Cleaned up the clutch, about to put the clutch on, belt on, and then we'll put this puppy back together. Alright, so I got my clutch cover, I got the computer all back together, cleaned everything up, got my back plate back on, back plastic cover, whatever you want to call it. I set my belt deflection, but it's really going to be hard for me to decide if it's the correct deflection until I actually ride it for a second. But this was the correct deflection before I changed out the jack shaft with the, I think it's a 60,000s on there. So we'll give it a shot, we'll try it out and see what it looks like, and if it needs to be changed, I'll adjust it after that. Also, one tip that I can give you that I've actually had experience with is put a little bit of Loctite on this when you snug it up. The blue Loctite, nothing else, just the blue. And that'll keep this drive sheeple bolt from popping out. Because I actually had that happen to me in Michigan. It came out and my belt started squealing and I didn't know what was going on. But luckily it didn't fall out. It just fell into the belly pan. So that's something I would definitely suggest. Okay, so there it is, finally back together. That was really fun, and I don't want to do it anytime soon. This thing's been out of commission so long that the battery, which is brand new, has gone dead. So now we should probably try it. It didn't really occur to me until now that I probably should have tried it as soon as I got the hood on before I put everything back together and put all my tools away, just in case the reverse doesn't work. But, oh well. I have to let it warm up for a second. Okay, so here goes nothing. What? It works. I'm freaking ecstatic right now. I don't want to actually make it go backwards. I can tell that it's going into reverse though because the track jerks. Watch. See the track jerk? Yeah, it's definitely going into reverse. I just don't want to pull it away from my jack. Well, that's freaking awesome. Alright, well, if you have any questions, leave them down below. Glad it worked out for me.